Picture two people sitting down on the last day of the month to check their bank accounts. The first person earns $85,000 a year, over $7,000 coming in every single month. They're not reckless, they don't gamble, they don't have obvious vices, but as they scroll through their account, the balance staring back at them is $340. The money is gone. Again. And they genuinely cannot tell you where it went. The second person earns $54,000 a year, barely $4,500 a month. They check their account with the calm of someone who already knows what they'll find. $2,200 left over, savings growing, investments compounding quietly in the background. They know exactly where every dollar went, because they decided in advance. Same month, same bills, same ordinary life. One person has money, one doesn't. And the difference has almost nothing to do with the paycheck. This isn't about budgeting tips or spending freezes or cutting your morning coffee. It's about the hidden architecture of how money disappears. The structural forces most people never identify, because they're too busy blaming themselves for a problem that was carefully engineered around them. Here's exactly why your salary vanishes every month. Not the obvious reasons, the ones nobody talks about. The invisible escalator. When your income goes up, your spending goes up with it. Not all at once. Gradually, quietly, a slightly nicer apartment when you got the raise, a newer car when the old one was still fine, a better gym, a better restaurant, a better everything, because you could afford it and you felt like you'd earned it. Economists call this lifestyle creep. It's the pattern where spending tracks income so closely that no matter how much you earn, you end up with roughly the same amount left over at the end of the month, which is often very little. The data is extraordinary. According to a Goldman Sachs survey, roughly 40% of Americans earning over $300,000 a year describe themselves as living paycheck to paycheck. Read that again, $300,000 a year, and still running out of money. These aren't people who don't know what a budget is. These are executives, surgeons, partners at law firms, people who spent decades becoming very good at earning money and somehow ended up with none of it. Because the escalator moved, and they moved with it. And nobody ever told them it only goes in one direction. You assume that making more money would solve the problem. It doesn't. It just relocates the problem to a more expensive address. The leak you can't see. Open your bank statement right now, scroll down, count every recurring charge that leaves your account automatically without you making a decision in the moment. Most people can't accurately name what they're paying for. In a recent survey, the average American spends $219 per month on subscriptions, but estimates they spend around $86. That's a gap of more than $130 every month, over $1,500 a year, draining into services they don't actively use and didn't consciously choose to keep. Streaming platforms, fitness apps, news sites, cloud storage, delivery memberships. Software trials that silently converted into paid plans 6 months ago. Each one felt like a small, reasonable decision when you signed up. Each one now collects its payment automatically on a schedule you've forgotten, long after the enthusiasm that justified it has disappeared. Think of it like a slow drip from a pipe you can't find behind a wall. No single drop feels significant. You'd never notice it in a day. But come back in a year and the floor is rotted through, and you still can't tell exactly when it started. That's not an accident. That's the design. Signing up is frictionless. Canceling is deliberately complicated. The business model runs on your inattention. The average household now subscribes to more than 4 streaming platforms simultaneously. Together, the subscriptions add up to a car payment leaving your account every single month, while you scroll through menus deciding there's nothing worth watching, the math you were never taught. Every dollar you spend has 2 costs: the price on the receipt, and what that dollar would have become if you'd invested it instead. $100 spent today isn't just $100 gone. At a historically average market returns of 7%, that $100 becomes $200 in 10 years, $400 in 20, $800 in 30. When you spend $200 a month on subscriptions you barely use, you're not spending $200. You're spending $200 plus everything it would have quietly compounded into. Over 30 years, that $200 a month invested instead becomes more than $240,000. Nobody thinks about purchases this way. But here's the part that actually stays with you. At some point, maybe at 40, maybe at 50, you'll sit down and do this math on your own life. You'll scroll back through a decade of small decisions, the subscriptions, the upgrades, the things that felt reasonable in the moment, and you'll see, clearly and too late to undo, exactly what those decisions compounded into. Not $240,000 in savings, but the absence of it. A number that was always possible, that was being quietly built in reverse, one automatic charge at a time. That moment of clarity is coming for most people. The only variable is whether it arrives early enough to matter, which is exactly why the financial industry, the subscription industry, and the retail industry don't want you thinking this way now. The raise that made everything worse. There's a pattern that plays out constantly among people who feel financially stuck. They get a raise. They feel relief. Within 6 months, they feel exactly as stretched as before, sometimes more. Here's what happened. The raise arrived and felt like margin, like room to breathe. And almost immediately, that room filled in. A subscription added here, a slightly better habit justified there. A new car payment because the salary now supported it. A move to a nicer apartment because the raise made it technically affordable. Each individual decision was defensible. Taken together, they consumed the entire raise. And then some. The new income became the new baseline. The new expenses became the new normal. And the same feeling of running out of money returned, now at a higher altitude. This is why income doesn't solve the underlying problem. Most people spend up to what they earn automatically, the way water fills whatever container it's poured into. The container gets larger, it never gets full. The thing nobody wants to admit. Here's the part most finance content skips over entirely, because it's uncomfortable. Not all of this is subscriptions and lifestyle creep. Some of it is quieter, more personal. Spending functions as emotional regulation. When you're stressed, a purchase delivers brief relief. When you're bored, buying something creates temporary stimulation. When you feel undervalued at work, buying something nice restores a feeling of deserving. When you're anxious about money, spending paradoxically eases the anxiety for a few hours, even though the spending is also its cause. This is the loop most people are actually living in, and almost nobody names it out loud. Research consistently shows that chronic overspending is more often an emotional pattern than a knowledge failure. The person who understands exactly why impulse spending is destructive, and still does it, isn't ignorant. They're managing something the budget spreadsheet can't see. The spending is doing a job. It's meeting a need that nothing else is meeting in that moment. This is why no budget on its own fixes the problem. Restrict spending in one category, and the pressure releases sideways into another. Buy fewer clothes, spend more on food. Cut the takeout, start impulse buying things online at 11 p.m. The money finds somewhere to go because the need behind it hasn't changed. Until you understand what the spending is actually solving for, the salary will keep disappearing, regardless of how much of it there is. The fixed costs that quietly took over. And then there's the category most people don't even think to question, because it doesn't feel like a choice. Fixed costs, housing, car payment, insurance, childcare, which in many American cities now costs more annually than in-state college tuition. Healthcare premiums. Groceries that cost meaningfully more than they did 5 years ago. These aren't impulse purchases. You didn't choose them in a moment of weakness. They arrived gradually over years, and now they consume the majority of every paycheck before you've made a single discretionary decision. The deeper problem is when these costs were set. Most people lock in their fixed expenses during moments of optimism, when the raise was fresh, when the future felt stable, and those costs persist long after circumstances shift. The apartment that was comfortable at $80,000 becomes a strain at $65,000. The car payment that made sense with 2 incomes doesn't make sense with 1. Fixed costs are hard to cut because they require hard decisions. So most people keep looking for the answer in their discretionary spending, the coffee, the takeout, the small stuff, when the real pressure is structural, and it was set years ago. And here's what makes all of it so disorienting. None of these forces announced themselves. The escalator didn't come with a warning. The subscriptions didn't send a reminder. The fixed costs didn't arrive with a label that said, "This will outlast the circumstances that justified it." The emotional spending didn't introduce itself as a pattern. It just felt each time like a reasonable response to a hard day. That's the architecture, invisible by design, operating below the level where most people think to look. Why the money really disappears. The salary was never the problem. The problem is a spending floor that rises every time the income does. A lifestyle with no defined ceiling, subscriptions collecting quietly in the background, fixed costs locked in during someone else's version of your life. And underneath all of it, an emotional pattern that no spreadsheet has ever been designed to address. The people who always seem to have money aren't earning more than you. Most of them aren't even more disciplined than you. They just built a structure where the money goes where they decided, before the month started, before the mood shifted, before the spending could happen automatically. The money doesn't disappear. It goes exactly where the system around you was designed to send it. The only question is whether you've built a system of your own.